Welcome to this rapid revision video looking at Elizabeth's religious settlement. This is a massively important part of her religious policy, so we're going to spend some time really unpicking it. The need for compromise. Elizabeth wanted England to be Protestant, but she also wanted to end the years of religious conflict and instability that had rocked England during the Reformation. This would require compromise, a situation that both Catholics and Protestants could accept, even if they weren't that enthusiastic about all the changes. Elizabeth did not agree with the extreme Protestantism of the Puritans, who might challenge her authority. But she also knew that for England to be stable, it would help for the country to follow the monarch's religion, the Protestant Church of England. Could she satisfy all sides and ensure that the radical Puritans wouldn't call for her overthrow? Well, most historians think that she did a pretty good job, but it's far from perfect. Now for the legal stuff. Compromises rarely keep all sides happy. Instead, they seek only to be acceptable to as many people as possible. Elizabeth's religious settlement included the Act of Supremacy. This had originally been passed by her father Henry VIII, and in this case it confirmed Elizabeth as head of the Church of England. Therefore, all clergy had to swear allegiance to her. Then there was the Act of Uniformity. This established the appearance of churches and their services. It included some Protestant and some more traditional features, and for traditional, kind of read Catholic looking features. And by uniformity it means that they were all uniform or the same. Then there was the Royal Injunctions. This was a set of instructions issued by Sir William Cecil to all clergy to reinforce the Acts of Supremacy and Uniformity. So if anyone was refusing to swear allegiance or to change their church in a more uniform way, then the Royal Injunctions could be issued to force them to do so. And then there was the Ecclesiastical Commission. This was established to ensure clergy were disciplined in applying for terms of the settlement and could punish disloyal clergy. So with all the legal things out the way, what did this look like in practice? One of the most controversial but also most important parts of the Act of Uniformity was the Book of Common Prayer. Part of the Act of Uniformity was this new prayer book. This was a difficult balancing act. New Protestant prayer books had in the past prompted rebellions, for example in Edward VI's time. The same Book of Common Prayer was adopted by all churches. Failure to use it resulted in punishments. But the wording of the book was careful and deliberately vague. During the Holy Communion, or Mass, if you were looking at it from a Catholic point of view, this allowed Protestants to interpret the bread and wine as a symbol of the Last Supper, while Catholics could take it as a miracle of transubstantiation, where the bread and the wine miraculously becoming Christ's body and blood. The wording was deliberately vague, so that someone within their own heart and within their own faith could accept it, a typical example of a compromise. Some ritual also remained. Priests were to wear vestments still. These were the special clothes that marked them out from the rest of the congregation. So how was this uniformity enforced? The Act of Uniformity also insisted that everyone should attend church each Sunday and on holy days such as Good Friday. Failure to do so would result in a 1 shilling or 12 pence fine each time someone didn't turn up to church. A typical labourer might have earned 1 shilling and 6 pence a week. More skilled craftsmen might earn 2 shillings. Poorer workers might only earn about 9 pence a week. This made a 1 shilling fine a serious deterrent, at least for the poor. However, the wealthy nobility, that politically Elizabeth would be more interested in not upsetting, could easily afford a shilling, allowing them to more easily ignore it. But this also meant that wealthy and influential Catholics could avoid Protestant churches without much inconvenience, and without opposing Elizabeth's reforms too dangerously for either side. Again, neither side's perfectly happy, but it's a compromise. What about the royal injunctions then when things were starting to go wrong? Further rules were sent to the clergy to enforce Elizabeth's settlement. Clergy were to teach congregations about the Act of Supremacy and the fact that she was the head of the church. Church refusers were to be reported to the Privy Council. Each parish was to have a Bible in English, not one in Latin. All preachers needed a licence from the government. And Protestants considered pilgrimages to monuments and fake miracles pure superstition. Those were banned. But the vestments were still to be worn by the clergy, so the churches and their services would have had a more traditional and Catholic appearance. References to fake miracles allowed the possibility that there may be some as yet undiscovered real ones, which is another compromise, and it would have reassured some Catholics. Also, pictures were still allowed in churches. Some local communities took great pride in their church decorations, which added colour to an often drab life. This too was quite popular. An example of a church wall painting can be seen in the top right. Puritans, though, they were unhappy. None of this stuff was in the Bible, and that was against their beliefs. In the previous video on the English Reformation, we've had a look at these pictures before, but now we're going to apply that to the Elizabethan settlement. Firstly, we can see the main features of the Catholic Church, and now we can see a Protestant church of the era. Some of the features do remain, but not all of them. Under the Elizabethan settlement, there was a pulpit where anyone could speak. There was an English Bible. There was a vicar with vestments still. You can see those draped around his shoulders, and he's speaking in English. There's a simple altar. There's a royal coat of arms, a lectern for the Bible reading, plain glass, and a Lord's Prayer and 10 Commandments. There's also plain walls. However, this is a massive generalisation. If you've ever been into an English country church, you've probably seen things different to this, and it depended on the church. So really, was there that much uniformity? Many churches chose to keep their fairly elaborate altars, but they might remove the wall paintings. Or they might keep the wall paintings, but remove things like the rood screen. It really depended on the taste of the local area. So, if there's so much variation in English churches today, was the act of uniformity really followed? Well, this is all part of the compromise, and how strictly Elizabeth wanted people who were breaking the rules to be followed up. Let's consider the impact on the clergy. Elizabeth hoped that Catholics would accept the traditional feel of the churches and not have to choose between their loyalty to their church and faith and their loyalty to their queen. She hoped that in the long term, as old clergy and worshippers died out, Catholicism would too. If they got on with it and publicly conformed, Elizabeth would not persecute the Catholics. Clergy took an oath of supremacy, saying that they accepted Elizabeth as head of the church. About 8,000 priests and lesser clergy did this. That's out of about 10,000 parishes, so not a bad success rate. The bishops, though, were less supportive. Only one swore the oath. Elizabeth dismissed the others and had to appoint 27 new Protestant bishops, but that was tricky. These were in really short supply as they were university educated and many of them had not yet graduated, so she had to work to ensure their loyalty. What about the impact on ordinary people then? Most people did accept the settlement and willingly attended Church of England services. This was despite many holding Catholic beliefs. Several things helped make this possible. The vague wording of the Book of Common Prayer, which allowed them to interpret parts in a Catholic way. Where Catholics were in the majority, such as in Lancashire and the North East, Elizabeth ensured that the settlement was not too harshly enforced. This allowed people to live as recusants, Catholics who would not attend church and often paid the shilling fine. For most of the country, the transition was actually quite smooth. Some strongly Protestant areas celebrated with violent enthusiasm, however. In London, some saint statues and Catholic ornaments were defaced, and in some English churches you can see that to this day, with the old faces of the saints chiselled away. That I always find a much more violent act than simply removing the monument right away. It's this way of saying, look, we remember the old ways and we're deliberately rejecting them. What about the Church of England? What was this organisation's role in enforcing the settlement? The Church had long had a role in judging on moral issues. Church courts would act to ensure that marriages were not forced, make judgments in cases of sexual offences, including bigamy, where people might be married to two different people at the same time, and where people had been slandered, and that meant that they had had damaging lies told about them. Church courts also ruled in cases of inheritance and wills when people died. Other offences were dealt with in ordinary courts. Unsurprisingly, though, church courts were mostly concerned with religious matters, so helped enforce the religious settlement too. So what was the role of the Church of England in society? The Church of England had control of what was preached. Licences were granted to priests, ensuring that priests spread Elizabeth's religious and political messages. They also offered guidance to communities. In times of hunger and distress, people turned to the church. They also had a role in running church courts, as we've already mentioned. They also had a role in legitimising and supporting the power of the monarch as head of the church. And it enforced the religious settlement, guided by the royal injunctions that we've covered already. On that last point, Let's explore how the Church of England as an organisation had a role in enforcing this religious settlement. There were visitations and inspections to ensure that priests had taken the oath of supremacy, which recognised Elizabeth as head of the church, and to make sure that they had been following the settlement's terms. In the first round of visitations in 1559, 400 clergy were dismissed. After that, visitations happened about every 3 to 4 years. The church also helped to monitor professional licence for people like doctors, teachers and midwives. Visitations included inspecting these, so they were wide-ranging. They almost sound like an Ofsted inspection at a school, don't they? Although Elizabeth said that she didn't want the settlement enforced too harshly, many of the inspectors were more radical Protestants. There was some destruction of statues and decorations as they got carried away. Some final points then. Elizabeth was Protestant, but much of England wasn't. She needed to compromise. How successful was she? Well, let's consider this historical interpretation. This is taken from Change and Protest 1536 to 88, the Mid-Tudor Crises, by Turvey and Hurd, written in 1988. The settlement had mixed success. It largely succeeded in establishing a broadly based national church which excluded as few people as possible. On the other hand, the settlement not only failed to attract the Puritans, but devout Catholics were likewise marginalised, with the consequence of encouraging opposition and non-conformity. So that's the refusal to follow the rules of uniformity. The religious settlement included the Act of Supremacy, Act of Uniformity and Royal Injunctions, placing Elizabeth at the head of the Church of England. There was some opposition to adopting change. Non-attendance at church resulted in a fine. Visitations and courts ensured uniformity was followed, in most cases anyway. The Book of Common Prayer and church art and architecture, though, were intended to be acceptable to both Protestants and Catholics, a typical compromise. Given this balance, do you agree with the interpretation? Was Elizabeth's compromise a successful one? Perhaps you could put your thoughts in the comments below. I hope that this video has been useful to you, because it's pretty much at an end now, and it's not as rapid as some, but like I said at the start, this is a really important topic which we really needed to unpick in quite a lot of detail. But if it has been useful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.